Hey guys, Omerko here, self-taught web developer. As we worked with the template-driven forms in my last video, through this video I will show you another way to work with forms in Angular. Let's take a look how can we use reactive forms of Angular. Reactive forms are a model-driven approach to handle forms. Through form controls, we are able to handle each specific control or even group them. Next to that, we can easily set and remove values, validate values, and even create dynamic forms. For this example, I will once again work with my home component, so I will go into my source, app, and then home. First of all, let's open up the home component HTML file and remove all the content that we have inside, so just to remove the content from my last video. Now I will also go to my TypeScript file of my home component and remove this submit data, this submitted user, and user property as well. To use reactive forms in Angular, we must first use their module. To do such a thing, I will go into my app.module.typescript file. Here in the imports array, I must import reactive forms module, which must be imported from @angular/forms. Now that we have this, we can go into our home.component.typescript file. I will create here quickly a property of username, and I will set it to be equal to new form control. This form control must also be imported from @angular/form, and as we are using our reactive forms module, we are able to use form control from Angular. So here I could just run this kind of form control kinda to declare it, and inside I could pass the empty string. This empty string will indicate the value of this form control, well, of our username property. If you wish, you can also have some default value like John Doe, for example, but I will leave it as an empty. Let's now go to our HTML file, and here let's create the input field. Type of the input field will be text and placeholder will be username. If we wish to bind our form control from a TypeScript file now to this input field, we must bind property of form control. So here we must set this equal to the name of our property, which is our username. And this is it. Also, if you wish to show the value from our property somewhere, we can simply, for example, here create a paragraph and bold text inside. I will use username as a text, 2 dots, and after that I will just bind my property of username here. You see, reactive forms will run these value changes, and in the background it will subscribe that here, and in our value it will return the latest value of that change, which means that in the end we should hold the value in our username, which should be shown in our input field and also in our username bind that we bind here in our paragraph. So here, to use that value, we must also use that value to get that value changed. To test this in my browser, I can just type, for example, John here, and you will see that John value in the input field is passed correctly, but also we are seeing it down in our username. If you wish to update your value from the code, for example, then we will go into our TypeScript file back. Here I can simply run the function, well, create the function of update username. And inside of this function I could, for example, use my this.username property, and on it I will have some options, for example, to get this value or even to set value, which is the method. This set value will accept the string, for example, here, which I could pass, and here I will pass for a string like John Doe as a username. Now in my HTML I can simply create the button here, button with the type of a button, and here the text will say update username, and if I wish to run my update username method, here I must use click event listener, which will listen to my update username method that I have in my TypeScript file. By this, on my browser right now, we can see that if I would click on my update username, I would immediately get the data inside of my username form control, which should be shown in our input field and also in our paragraph here. Next to simply creating our controls, we are also able to group controls in one group. To do such a thing, before my username, I will create account property. I will set it equal to new form group now. This form group should be imported again from Angular/forms. Now to my form group I could pass the simply object here, and inside we could specify our fields for our form. So here I will first have my first name field. To this first name now I could pass form control, so I must initialize it with new form control, and this here will have empty value by default. Now I will repeat the same for my last name, so here last name should be set to my new form control, and here I will use again empty value. Here I should use comma or nothing. We can also now remove our username and also update username here, because now we will use this form group. And also let's here remove all of our tags that we have in our HTML. Here I will create now the form tag from HTML. Action won't be passed here, and this form tag will be bind to a form group. So here I could bind form group, which should be equal to my form group of my account property. Not accounts, but account. So inside, let's create some input fields. Let me create some spacing. Input field, type is text, that's correct. Placeholder could be first name. And now we won't bind it with our form control as we did it in the previous example, but we will bind it with form control name. So this here will be set equal to our first name. So basically by this, our form will enter in our form group by the name of account, which is this here, and inside our input field will be bind with the control name of first name, which is this here. Let's repeat the same for our last name now. Here last name, and also here property should be last name. Also, if we wish to submit our data now, here in a form I will create the button with the type of submit. Here this button could just say submit, but if I wish to submit the data in a reactive form, I won't submit it just by the button. On a form group, on a form element, I will be able to use this event called ng-submit. This event will run whenever we submit our form. So here I could run method of submit data, for example, and let's create this method quickly. So this submit data in my TypeScript file, here submit data, could just console.log my account. So this .account, and that's good enough. Before I test this, I will go back to my HTML, and I will be able here in my button to bind my property of disabled, not the property but attribute, and this here will be bind to account that valid. So if the account is valid, then the submit will be disabled. So let's reverse that. So now if the account form is not valid, then the submit data won't be able to be submitted. So for this bit of code to work, we should also add some validation now. I will quickly add here to my input fields required attributes, so we could have some default validation for our fields. Now to test this out on my screen, we can see that here we have our first name and last name values, but our submit button is disabled. We cannot click on it. If I would populate my first name with John and my last name of Doe, then my submit button will be clickable. Before I submit my data, I will inspect my element here and go into console. And here, if I click submit now, we will see the log of our form group, because we are running that on submit method, that ng-submit event. And here we can see that the status of the whole form is valid. then here we could read the values from our fields like first name and last name. Also, if we go in each control separately here, if I check, for example, my first name control, we will see that the value of the control is John, which is, yes it is. Then touched control is set to true because we literally clicked on our control. Also, we can see that the status of the control is valid. We could check the same for our last name here. So I hope that you now know how reactive forms work in basics, as there is much more that can be done here. For my next video, we will take a quickly look into something called pipes. Thank you all for watching. If you like what you saw, please click like and subscribe, as I am posting new content weekly. Thank you once again, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.